I'll probably give it to a government or a charity.
Good on you both. You've been fantastic. Sue Bradford, Dean Hill, kia ora to you both. It's been
Kia
lovely.
ora.
Kia ora.
I'm Wallace Chapman. Stay with RNZ National. We have Checkpoint with Lisa Owen straight after the news. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then, panel family.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Yeah, Haere Akine, suck it up. The Prime Minister's hinting tighter vape laws could be on the way. Is it time to go prescription only? Dr Brian Betty joins us. Waihi Beach pensioners who have lost everything in flash flooding. A bank that doesn't want Gloriavale's money. We're in court for that one. The praise is a little hazy for the government's beefed up fog cannon fund. Tempted to turn your mobile to flight mode to avoid after hours emails. You're not alone. Plenty of Kiwi workers are feeling under the pump. And in sport, a love letter to cricketer Devon Conway. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Talofa lava, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. Council inspectors last assessed safety systems at Loafers Lodge 5 years ago, even though they're meant to check every year. 2 weeks ago, a fatal fire on the top floor of the Wellington building killed at least 5 people. The last on-site audits at the lodge took place in 2018 and 6 years prior in 2012. Jemima Houston reports.
Under government building regulations, councils are responsible for backup audits of commercial buildings. Boarding houses like Loafers Lodge are meant to be checked annually as they are the highest risk. The hostel was issued a building warrant of fitness by Wellington City Council in March this year, based on independent checks of its 13 safety systems. However, the council was meant to do its own backup audit on site every year and not just accept this on paper.
The Crown Research Institute GNS Science has pleaded guilty to charges brought against it in the wake of the deadly Whakaari volcanic eruption. And the owners of Whakaari, White Island, have failed to have charges thrown out relating to health and safety breaches in the lead up to the 2019 eruption that killed 22 people. Amy Williams reports.
The charges against GNS relate to 23 field trips its staff took to the island before the eruption and the Institute's failure to sufficiently consult helicopter pilots about the risks. GNS will be sentenced in August and could be fined up to $500,000. Meanwhile, 3 members of the Buttle family, Andrew, James and Peter Buttle, will face trial in July after failing to have charges dropped relating to their role as directors of the company overseeing the island.
The Bank of New Zealand says a child labour ruling is the primary reason it terminated its banking relationship with the Gloriavale Christian community. Gloriavale won an interim High Court injunction last December preventing the BNZ from closing the community's commercial bank accounts. During a High Court hearing on the injunction today, BNZ's lawyer, Will Irving, said an employment court finding on child labour at Gloriavale was inconsistent with the bank's human rights policy.
The Courage decision, for the first time, revealed a system of forced child labour in the Gloriavale businesses and across the Gloriavale businesses. It was inconsistent with BNZ's human rights policy for it to continue to bank entities forcing children, school-age children, to work for them.
Will Irving told the court the BNZ believed it has the right to close the accounts and could do so for any reason. A Waihi Beach resident says he was shocked at how quickly floodwaters inundated his house during yesterday's downpour. Between 50 and 80 millimetres of rain fell in a 24-hour period in the Waihi area of the Western Bay of Plenty. Brian Thorne says it caused devastating damage to his house and belongings, but he counts himself lucky to have got out with his life.
Within 2 or 3 minutes, if people weren't able, they'd be underwater. But we were lucky we got out with our lives and like everyone else around here, but had to be quick because it happened so quick.
Brian Thorne says he'll be staying with his son, who lives nearby, until he can find new accommodation. The government is being urged to follow Australia's lead and bring in tighter regulations for vaping. Australia is bringing in legislation to make vapes available by prescription only. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says he's asked the Health Minister to bring some recommendations to Cabinet. Papatoetoe High School Principal Vaughan Kuyo says schools nationwide are dealing with the problem.
I know from my colleagues, my friends, the society that I live in, that we're all dealing with the downward creep in terms of chronological age that vaping is managing to reach down into, which has got to be a problem, doesn't it?
You can hear more about this on Checkpoint shortly. In sport, the New Zealand under-20 football side faces a daunting task tomorrow when they meet the USA at the World Cup in Argentina. The United States won all 3 pool games without conceding a goal, while the junior All Whites had to rely on other results going their way to book a spot in the top 16. Coach Darren Baisley says he's trying to keep his players calm.
It's just another game. I feel like looking back at 2017, we made it a really big occasion and did a lot of hype around this is an opportunity to make history. So whilst we've talked about it this time, we are treating it like this is another game. It's 11v11. We're all the same age players.
Kick-off is at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Former Black Caps skipper Stephen Fleming has guided the Chennai Super Kings to their 5th IPL title, beating the Gujarat Titans by 5 wickets in a rain-marred final in Ahmedabad. Chasing a revised target of 171 from 15 overs, Chennai scrambled to victory, hitting the last ball for a 4. The final was originally scheduled on Sunday, but rain forced the organisers to move the game to its reserve day, making it a tough 2 days for the Super Kings coach.
This one's amazing. It was a big, long 2 days, but when it comes down to the last couple of balls, you're just sitting and watching, really. So helpless and ageing by the second and just pleased to get over the mark.
Black cap Devon Conway top scored for Chennai with 47 off 25 balls. The Pulse have promoted Anna Andrews-Tasola to head coach for the next ANZ Netball Premiership season. And the Hurricanes have locked in New Zealand Sevens coach Clark Laidlaw to lead the Super Rugby Pacific side next season. That's the news.
Pressure on police.
I understand why the police have had to review their policy, but while it's dangerous in terms of fleeing drivers, it's more dangerous to pursue those drivers.
Strain on ambulance staff.
If we can't get this right, we will watch deaths occurring in the community that didn't need to happen.
And more work for civil defence.
They don't look any better this morning than they did last night. The houses have got a lot of mud through them. It's going to be a major clean-up.
News never stops. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula. Showers, some heavy. Thunderstorms possible in Taranaki this evening. Fog patches tomorrow morning. For Bay of Plenty and Taupo, cloudy with a few showers today, becoming fine tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with variable high cloud. Whanganui and from Taihape to Wellington, also for Wairarapa, occasional showers, some heavy today with thunderstorms possible from about Levin southwards this evening. Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine, showers this evening, possibly heavy and thundery. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain or showers, some heavy falls and thunderstorms today. Canterbury, mainly fine, a few spots of rain this evening. Otago and Southland, high cloud, scattered rain for a time today and again from tomorrow afternoon. And for Orekohu, Chatham Islands, rain possibly heavy with thunderstorms, clearing tomorrow morning. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at about 5:20.
Kia ora rā e ho, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai, ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. There are growing calls tonight for tighter regulations on vaping as teachers and experts say the problem is spiralling out of control. A recent survey by ASH New Zealand shows there's been a 209% increase in daily vaping among 13 to 14-year-olds. The Australian government has recently announced a ban on recreational vaping, and the UK is considering a crackdown. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has directed the Health Minister to bring some suggestions to Cabinet. Louise Tanuth reports.
Vaping is everywhere. Massively.
People that didn't even smoke, like cigarettes, are moving on to like vaping. And it's just like, what was the point of going on to vapes if you weren't even doing it for like to reduce your cigarette intake? I think it's happening at schools these days. Vaping was not around when I was in school.
I don't agree on vaping here in New Zealand, so especially the kids.
I think because it's so easily accessible now, you could get it at dairies, you could get it at small convenience stores now.
Principal of Papatoetoe High School and President of the Secondary Principals Association, Vaughan Queo, says schools nationwide are dealing with the problem every day.
I know from my colleagues, my friends, the society that I live in, that we're all dealing with the downward creep in terms of chronological age that vaping is managing to reach down into, which has got to be a problem.
Some schools are resorting to the use of CCTV and vape detectors to catch students vaping on school grounds. Vaughan says despite their best efforts, students are getting their hands on vapes no matter what.
There is the argument that vaping is a good tool to help get you off smoking, and that may well be the case, but there's a whole lot of kids that probably never would have started smoking who have started vaping.
Ash New Zealand says its February survey shows while smoking rates have fallen to a record low in 13 and 14-year-olds, vaping has skyrocketed. Daily vaping has risen from 3.1% in 2019 to 9.6% in 2021. That's a whopping 209% increase. Director at Ash, Ben Udan, says 40% of students said the main reason they were vaping was to give it a try.
Particularly, I think of concern at the moment is we've seen a really big increase in things like the disposable vapes, which are very, very cheap, very easy to conceal.
More than 75% of students are getting vapes from social sources, either friends, older people or family. Only 7.6% of those who regularly vape say their main source of vapes was a vape shop, dairy or online.
E-cigarettes might seem innocent and appealing, but the truth is, many e-cigarettes contain poisonous chemicals, such as those in biofuel, paint thinner and bug killer.
This Quit campaign has been launched this week in Victoria, highlighting the risks of vaping. Quit's boss and CEO of the Cancer Council Victoria, Todd Harper, says it's beneficial for those trying to quit smoking, but not for others.
So we know that for non-smokers who use these products, they're 3 times as likely to go on and become smokers using tobacco products, which is, of course, the last thing that we need given the great success that we've had in reducing smoking levels over several decades now.
On the streets of Auckland's CBD, there's mixed opinion on whether or not New Zealand should make a similar move.
Some people can't afford to go to a GP and afford a prescription to get a vape. People still vape a lot in Australia. You can still get them from TSGs as well without a prescription. So there's always going to be a loophole around it.
Yeah, the prescription, yeah, I agree, yeah. So we can give an Aussie as an example for us.
Similar to how there's a tobacco tax now. I think something like that should be implemented.
Yeah.
I think it'd benefit them a lot as well. They're kids, and if you make something that expensive, I think they would look away from it.
And that was Louise Tanuth reporting. Well, the chair of General Practice New Zealand, Dr. Brian Betty, says it's time to tighten up the rules.
I think with what we're seeing with younger people in particular and adolescents taking up vaping who otherwise wouldn't smoke and becoming addicted to vaping through nicotine, we may be creating a problem down the track that we never anticipated. So it is time for a debate on this. It is time to look at our regulations around vaping and what's happening and whether we do need to tighten things and access to vapes at this point.
Are GPs seeing addicted teens, ones who by law shouldn't be able to buy vapes, under 18s?
They seem to be readily available, and what the studies are showing, there is an upswing in teens especially who are using vapes, and in particular vapes that contain nicotine, and nicotine is addictive. So yeah, there is a lot of evidence around that there are a number of teens now who are potentially becoming addicted to nicotine and vapes, are getting access to them quite freely because of the readily accessible nature of vaping in our community, and this is a problem.
So how do we stop that? Is it time to go prescription only?
I think that would be potentially going too far. Vaping has a very important role to play in smoking cessation. and we need to make it available for smoking cessation and for those modalities. Probably there's a halfway point that maybe vapes need to be pharmacy only, available through quitline programs or smoking cessation programs, or through your GP or doctor. So we still need to make vapes available, however, not freely available that you can walk off the street and grab whatever you want, wherever you want.
So if you're suggesting the halfway house is to still go to a pharmacy per se, where you're seeing a health professional, does that mean you are saying we should not allow recreational vaping?
I think there's a real question mark over recreational vaping. Again, vaping is less harmful than smoking, we know that, but the real concern that's emerged here is in our younger people, rangatahi, and what's actually happening, especially in those under the age of 18. So, yeah, look, the question needs to be asked. I think it's time for an open debate on this and talking about the harms, the potential harms of vaping, especially addiction to vaping, and whether we as a society need to actually backtrack from this at this point. And I think that does include recreational vaping as it stands.
Do you think as a society we've interpreted less harmful to mean safe when it comes to vaping? We're misinformed?
Look, I think there's two issues here, and I think that's right. We've equated less harmful with safe. I think, vaping with nicotine is addictive. We know that nicotine can cause a whole lot of issues, such as increased blood pressure, increased breathing, heart rate. We know it can affect mood. It is addictive, and issues around impulse control, and especially with our younger ones, attention and learning and sleep become issues. But what we don't know, and this is also very, very important, we don't know the potential harm on the lungs with vaping over 10 to 20 years. So we're yet to see that. We don't know the problems that may emerge down the track, and this is a real concern for doctors and medical professionals.
Do you think the government has exercised enough caution when it comes to vaping?
I think there's been a real need to address smoking, which is known as one of the most harmful sort of issues we have in our society, and certainly the impact on the health of the nation is huge. So, yeah, using vaping as a harm reduction or smoking reduction tool, absolutely appropriate. I think questions have to be asked about the situation we've ended up in and how we've ended up here, and whether we have been too liberal with our approach to vaping at this point, and especially with what's happened in Australia and some jurisdictions overseas. I think now is the time to question our availability of vapes in the community.
As a doctor, would it be your personal preference that vapes are not available to anyone just for fun, just for recreation?
I probably would prefer to see an approach that really targeted smoking cessation, that made vapes freely available to those who were giving up smoking and needed a less harmful way of doing that. So we've got to be very, very careful that we allow that and keep that in place. So it's not about stopping that smoking cessation use of vaping. So no, I'm very, very supportive of that happening. But yes, as a doctor, I feel that there should be consideration for more restriction in terms of the availability of vapes outside of that.
And that is Dr. Brian Betty. Already you are getting in touch about this issue. Hayley says, I have been a high school teacher for 23 years. I haven't caught a smoker since 2003. Nearly all students vape at my school today. Kids who would never smoke are vaping a lot. It is already out of control, she says. And this one too from a listener. My nephew says that the local vape shop gave away vapes to encourage them to try vaping. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Do we need tighter regulations around vaping? How far should we go? Prescription only or something in between? 17 minutes after 5, Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some pensioners have lost all their belongings after flash flooding quickly inundated their homes in Waihi Beach. The extreme weather brought 44 millimetres of rain in just an hour yesterday, and more fell last night. Dozens of people fled their homes and are now working out if they can go back. Delphine Herbert is in Waihi Beach.
As the sun rose through the fog in the coastal town of Waihi Beach this morning, residents were assessing the damage. Brian was one of the worst hit. He's lost everything. He says the situation changed rapidly.
Got hold of my boy, he came down here. By the time he got here, it was up to here.
Up to your chest?
Up to the chest, yeah. And we tried to get back out that door. We couldn't because of the force of the water.
Brian says he managed to get out of the back door of his home before he was pulled up onto a ridge in his backyard. His entire home is covered in mud. The only thing he could salvage, a pair of pants. He says he had no time to grab any valuables.
Pretty devastating, and it happened so quick. You can actually see how people get stranded and stuck. 2 or 3 minutes, you know, I mean, if people weren't able, they'd be underwater. So. But we were lucky we got out with our lives and like everyone else around here, but had to be quick because it happened so quick.
Meanwhile, John Lorimer says he was in shock as he watched it unfold.
Yes, I was up at the RSA when it rained, and you've never seen pelting rain like it in your life. It was just absolutely terrible. All the car park up there was underwater. The bowling green was completely underwater.
Waihi Beach Surf Lifesaving Club was also underwater. President Dave Litton says the building was completely flooded, which hampered rescue efforts.
We couldn't get the boats out. We had a call go out for our call-out squad to come and get the IRBs in the water to help those people that needed to be helped to evacuate from their houses and obviously the pets and things that they need to get out. Got down here and it was just a water flow through the club.
Dave Litton says all electrical equipment will need to be replaced. The Beach House Cafe owner, Steve, has been offering free food and coffee to hard-hit locals. He says that is what the Waihi Beach community is all about.
The people around the community just comes together when this happens, and every time something like this happens, the community all help each other. The local fire department get a call out while they're trying to clean out the surf club down here, you know. So people rally together, and it's an amazing thing and an amazing feeling. And not that I want to be part of this happening, but we are in the middle of all of it. So
Katikati Waihi Beach Ward Councillor Alan Soul says council and emergency response teams have been working around the clock to ensure residents have all the help they need.
Pensioner housing is very, very sad. As you know, often they're more vulnerable people as well in our community, and they have lost their home. So the good thing is that they were found temporary accommodation quite quickly, and that the council staff have come through and are assessing and cleaning up.
Alan Soul says community spirit and resilience has shone through in this tough weather event.
It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do keep your feedback coming. Homai or Whakaari, we would love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program this evening. Also, let us know your thoughts on vaping and whether we need to tighten up the regulations. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
It's been revealed that Wellington City Council inspectors last checked on safety systems at Loafers Lodge 5 years ago, even though they're meant to do so every year. The midnight fire that ripped through the warren of rooms on the top floor of the Newtown Hospital 2 weeks ago killed at least 5 people. The Crown Research Institute, GNS Science, will be sentenced in August after pleading guilty to charges brought against it in the lead-up to the deadly Whakaari White Island eruption. Meanwhile, a judge has dismissed an application to drop charges laid against the owners of Whakaari White Island. 22 people were killed in the explosion. The Bank of New Zealand says it terminated its banking relationship with Gloriavale because an employment court ruling on child labour is inconsistent with its human rights policy. The Christian community won an interim High Court injunction last December preventing the BNZ from closing Gloriavale's commercial bank accounts. A hearing on the injunction has been taking place in Christchurch today. The coroner's hearing into the disappearance of John Beckenridge and his stepson has been told police don't believe the pair had a satellite phone when they went missing in 2015, despite claims from a friend of 11-year-old Michael Beckenridge. And reports are coming in that drones have hit 2 residential buildings in Moscow, injuring 1 person. No one has claimed responsibility. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the main centres, all routes appear to be moving normally at the moment. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 5:40.
Thank you, Evie. Black cap Devon Conway top scored for the Chennai Super Kings as they claimed a 5th Indian Premier League title in a match that turned into a last ball thriller. The T20 game took 3 days to be completed after rain interrupted play in Ahmedabad. Chasing a reduced total of 171, the Super Kings defeated the Gujarat Titans by 5 wickets thanks to some last over heroics. We're joined now by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Now, Felicity, you have characterised this as a fleeting but crucial impact from Devon Conway. There are cries of derision from the control room from one of our producers who says it wasn't fleeting, it was amazing.
Well, he did score 47 off 25 balls, which does suggest that's quite a quick fire knock, right? He was out in the 7th over of a T20 game.
No argument from me. Continue on.
He's been part of that solid opening partnership all season, and it's been with Ruturaj Gaikwad. He's had that sort of left-hand, right-hand partnership that's actually been quite successful for the Super Kings this year, and it really set the foundation today. And as much as his 47 was the top score, it wasn't actually, well, for his side, it wasn't actually him that was the sort of hero here. It was a veteran Indian, and it was Ravindra Jadeja who hit the winning runs, and it was a game that came down to an improbable victory for the Super Kings. It was boundaries off the last balls. This game had been going on for like twice as long as a T20 game was in terms of 6 hours for a normal T20 game that it was supposed to have been. And as you mentioned, it had actually been 3 days by the time they were celebrating this win. They'd had the first day rained off, so then that was a little bit of a wait and sort of anticipation for this big final of the IPL as well. And I mean, for Conway, as much as we're talking about this quick fire, it's probably actually been very good for him because he was actually one of the lucky Black Caps in that he was getting game time for the Super Kings. A lot of the Black Caps who missed series for New Zealand on IPL duties actually weren't getting that much time. They were benched essentially for the IPL sides. So for Conway to walk away from this has probably done his stocks quite well.
Yeah, well, for an untrained observer, the cool thing for me sitting there was that he's a left-hander.
Oh, we love left-handers. I'm a left-hander.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to the French Open. Organisers have offered tennis players at the tournament artificial intelligence protection from social media abuse. Is this a thing? And what is it? What does it do?
So the system's called Bodyguard, which is kind of an interesting name for this as well. And it really filters out the abuse across the social media platforms. So it's Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Discord, the whole array. So how players actually get involved is they scan a QR code, and so that links their socials to the system, the Bodyguard system. And the people who run Bodyguard say that they've got linguists to put together a list of, I guess, the common phrases or abusive terms, and this gets updated in real time. So if people are sort of cracking the code and finding ways to abuse the players. So it really is just making sure that the players don't see some of these comments or things that can pile on for, as we've especially heard, for tennis athletes. So the system filters it out so that they can't see it. It's the first Grand Slam that's done it, and it's a system which not every player has taken on board. Some of them say that they filter it out in their own ways, or some of them maybe don't see it as important. But world number one, Iga Swiatek, she has done it, and she says it's a step in the right direction. She knows that she's obviously quite a keen social media user and has gone after a couple of her matches. She's won a game and seen some of the abuse she gets, and has lost a game and seen some of the abuse she gets as well. So it's not necessarily how well you're playing determines how people are reacting to her. She was saying that after becoming world number one, everyone was expecting her to always win all of her matches, but when that wasn't the case, you know, those things piled on. So she said for her this is the right way, and she thinks that more tournaments should be taking this approach as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how those terms actually play out and whether the AI and this team of linguists can have actually figured out a way to help athletes in this environment.
Yeah, an electronic bodyguard and another interesting use of artificial intelligence. Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid, our sports reporter there. Ever turned your mobile to flight mode on days off to avoid work calls? What about the dilemma of emails dive bombing your inbox after hours? To answer or not answer? A new survey of thousands of Kiwi workers has found almost half of them feel like they can't do a good job because they're overloaded. Almost 14% feel pressured to work long hours, according to the Umbrella Wellbeing Workload Report that surveyed more than 7,000 workers. So when is enough too much, and how do you switch off without getting sidelined for it? Employment law advocate and mediator Danny Gelb joins us now. Hi, Danny.
Yeah, evening, Lisa.
Yeah, this is a bit of a dilemma, isn't it? So, I mean, how do you switch off from work when some staff wouldn't believe their employer would be happy about that?
Well, it comes down to, is it a case of the employer not being happy, or for some employees who actually get addicted to work? You know, they have the FOMO, the fear of missing out. If I'm not engaging all the time, am I potentially going to miss out on something that may be happening? Now, it goes back days well before cell phone and other, and email communications. You left work at the end of the day. That's it. Work was finished. There's a clear demarcation between home time and work time. But as things have progressed, and especially now after the COVID saga, there's very much a blurred line between what is actually work time and what is actually home time.
Yeah, so what is the answer to that? And are employers taking control of electronics like your mobile phone and email?
Well, there's only very few employers that I know of at the moment that are actively doing that, and they're doing it for the well-being of their staff. They're saying, look, if you're going away on holiday, then you should be on holiday. You should be thinking about enjoying yourself and having fun. You shouldn't be thinking about being work. Likewise, if you're away because you're not feeling well, we want you to get better. We don't want you to focus on work. We want you to focus on looking after yourself.
So in some cases, Danny, does that mean switching off your access?
Absolutely. One organisation I do a fair bit of work with, when you go on leave, you can't get through to that person. That person does not have access to any of their electronics. So even if you wanted to communicate, you can't. But it's all detailed in the employer's policies, and it's good to have a good conversation or a robust set of policies with your staff. Turn it into a discussion. What are the expectations? Because quite often, without the discussion, you'll find that the expectations of one is not the deliverables of the other, which can then cause major angst moving forwards.
So how do you deal with workers' fears that they're going to be judged for that or penalised in some ways? Because in some cases, it's probably true.
It could well be. Well, look, you take your typical, family-type business, whereby, the dad is the owner of the business, and there's some family members working there, and there's some non-family workers members that are working there. Family members typically are expected to be available 24/7, come what may, because that's just the life of a family business. But, is it fair and reasonable to have the same expectation on the other workers? I'd have to say not. And I don't think realistically that the business wants that, but that's what tends to happen because, if it's good for some, it's good for others. But to get around that, you just need to have the discussion. What are the expectations? At the end of the day, under the Employment Relations Act, the parties have an obligation to act in good faith and to be fair and reasonable. And normally a good, robust discussion about, what's expected and what's reasonable and what's not, gets around this problem quite adequately.
So, Danny, I'm wondering then, there'll be a lot of people who have one phone, which is essentially their work phone and their personal phone. Would that be a big no-no, Danny? You should always have two separate phones, in your view?
Well, I'm advocating to all my employer clients these days is you've got to have a separation between work and play. And that is when an employee comes in, they always want to use their phone for work or their number. Because it's a hassle to have two phones. Who wants to carry around two phones? Not many people do. It's a nuisance. But as far as an employer is concerned, anything that happens on that work phone is employer property, is work property. And the big issue is then when the employee wants to leave or is away, what do you actually do with that phone number? If it's a work-controlled phone number, you can divert it to someone else, or you can give that phone number to the next person coming in. But when the number belongs to the employee, then you have all these other difficulties, especially if, there's some form of a cloud where the employee is left. Now, is the employer going to forward on all the new contacts to the old employer under those circumstances, which can make life very difficult?
Good to talk to you, Danny. That's Danny Gelb, who is an employment law advocate and mediator. Interested in your thoughts on that, 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Do you hand your phone in when you go on holiday, work phone, and are your emails turned off, or how does it work? Should it be that way? 28 minutes to 6. Kia amo tone mai, do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's stick with a theme and go to business news with Nona. Ko taku hoa e nai anei ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Okay, Nona, we're talking about open banking. It's making its way here.
Well, we've been waiting a long time for it, I'll say that. So we're going to have it middle of next year, and that's going to be the 4 big banks. And it's also going to then roll out to others, so we can expect Kiwi Bank in 2026, for example. But all of this is coming together in the absence of our consumer data right legislation, which has long been promised by the government. They say that they will be bringing it in. We haven't seen that yet. We don't know what that is exactly going to look like. But we do know that open banking will be first off the rank. So that's a good thing. But it's consumer data right is something that you can use.
Explain to people what that is. So that's like when you want to womble off to another bank and take your data and information and all the rest of it.
It makes it really easy to share your data with a trusted third party, whether that's your banking data. In case of the consumer data right, we're talking about open banking here. But it could be your power bills. It could be your telecom bills. It could be all sorts of insurance, for example. It could be any kind of data that's yours that allows you to shop around for a better deal or to change up the services. So especially in open banking, this is going to be really important because increasingly we're seeing digital services and lots of different kind of fintechs out there. With the data right, you'll be able to more easily share that information. So for example, if you're shopping for a mortgage, well, you can just share that information with whomever you wish, as long as it's a trusted third party, and then they can easily compare whether or not, you meet their criteria.
Yeah, because the argument is that's one of the biggest barriers to you doing that, looking for a better deal, and it's the way a bank, in this case, can keep you as a client because it's just too hard to go elsewhere.
That's right. It is too hard, and especially with some of the credit legislation that we have in place, you have to give a whole lot of information about what your spending habits are and so on. Well, if you could just easily share that data with whomever you wish, it'd be a whole lot easier for you. We're still waiting for that. This piece of announcement, the open banking, is going to happen without the consumer data right protection in place, on the assumption that it will eventually be, although the Payments New Zealand is unsure, well, has a fairly good idea, but hasn't seen the final draft of what that is actually going to look like. So the banks have just taken upon themselves to come up with something themselves.
Forge ahead and set their own parameters.
That's right. Well, it's been a long time coming.
Okay, let's talk about aged care operator Avida. It's going to focus its efforts on developing premium care units. I mean, what's a premium care unit? People find retirement villages flipping expensive anyway.
Well, this is for aged care. So people are entering aged care, and that's different from a retirement village where you can go and hang out with your mates or whatever. This is when you can't live alone anymore. You need support. So aged care facilities provide that additional sort of nursing, could be more advanced home care, that kind of thing. But people are getting older when they go into these placements because there's a lot more support in the community for people who live at home. So the interesting thing here is that the standard aged care bed, which is what we kind of can occupy for whatever, next to nothing or whatever the government subsidy covers, isn't enough to create more beds. They're not actually going to be building them because they're not cost effective, because the companies that are building these aged care units are for-profit organizations. So if you can't turn a profit on it, why would you be building it? So what they're doing instead is they're building these premium care services, which they can charge more for, which makes it more, profitable. And that's what's happening. And unless we see some change at, the very basic level of taxpayer-funded support services for the development of aged care beds, we are not going to have them. Well, as people get older and retire or need help.
And markets, Nona, on that cheery note.
Oh, well, on that very cheery note, I can just tell you that the announcement by Arvida's definitely resonated with the market because the share price rose nearly 1%. The NZX Top 50 Index, though, it ended down nearly 0.5%, 57-point drop to 11,879. And the Kiwi is a touch weaker, just a touch, though. It doesn't have a positive tone to it, that's for sure. 60.4 US cents, 92.7 Australian, and 48.9 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. The High Court has heard Bank of New Zealand cannot justify terminating its 40-year banking relationship with the Gloriavale Christian community. The bank sought to close Gloriavale's commercial accounts following an employment court ruling last year, arguing banking with the community would be inconsistent with its human rights policy. Jean Edwards reports.
Gloriavale sought and won an interim High Court injunction to stop BNZ closing its accounts last year. Today, BNZ lawyer Will Irving told the court the decision was based primarily on an employment court ruling that found 3 former Gloriavale men were employees from the age of just 6.
The Courage decision, for the first time, revealed a system of forced child labour in the Gloriavale businesses and across the Gloriavale businesses. It was inconsistent with BNZ's human rights policy for it to continue to bank entities forcing children, school-age children, to work for them.
But Gloriavale's lawyer Richard Raymond KC says the employment court didn't make findings against its actual businesses.
They misconstrue or place too much reliance on or misunderstand that decision as a basis for making all of these extremely devastating decisions for the community, because there has been no finding about these applicants.
The court heard an internal BNZ report lists up to 17 other reasons for closing the accounts, which include the charitable trust, all businesses and the midwifery service. But Richard Raymond told Justice Helen Cull that a good proportion of matters relied on by the bank appear to have been sourced from the media or Wikipedia and are factually incorrect.
One can tell from the way it's framed, the spelling mistakes, the commas and so on, that it is taken directly from Wikipedia. No opportunity was given by the bank to the applicants to comment on those matters or refute what was said or say what has been done to change the matters which have been historically reported in Wikipedia.
Will Irving told the court the BNZ still believes it has the right to close the accounts and can do so for any reason.
Fundamentally, we do come back to the position that the contractual relationship between the parties is governed by the terms, and that those permit BNZ to terminate for any reason.
Justice Cull questioned Mr Irving about the bank's reliance on a 2021 human rights policy that hasn't been heralded to customers.
So when are you going to tell your customers that?
There are publicly available documents on BNZ's website, and again I can take you to that. They don't include the policy in question, but they do set out a great deal of information in relation to the steps that BNZ is taking, what its values are.
He told the court BNZ has modern slavery reporting obligations.
If businesses force people to work for them in the manner that these businesses have, and particularly children, then they are at risk of having their accounts closed.
The court heard $9 million is sitting in Gloriavale's accounts, which wouldn't be forfeited or frozen if they closed. The judge has reserved her decision.
Jean Edwards reporting there. It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Lots of feedback coming in about and also working hours. Do keep it coming. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'll get to some of it shortly, but first Evie with the headlines. Anaya Evie, mina pita kōrero.
A principal says schools are being left to deal with problems from vaping, and he wants the government to introduce tighter regulations. In Australia, vapes will only be available by prescription. Papatoetoe High School principal Vaughan Kuyo says increasingly younger children are taking up vaping, which can't be good. Wellington City Council documents concerning Loafers Lodge show the hostel was last audited 5 years ago. On-site checks are supposed to happen every year. At least 5 people died in the deadly blaze, which ripped through the building 2 weeks ago. The clean-up is well underway in the Western Bay of Plenty township of Waihi Beach after yesterday's flash flooding. The downpour overwhelmed stormwater drains and flooded the northern part of the coastal settlement, sparking evacuations. Teachers have been meeting with the Finance Minister today and will take his latest pay offer to staff tomorrow. Grant Robertson believes the meeting went well. Auckland's mayor wants communities to have more say on how the proposed $20 million storm response fund is spent. Wayne Brown has met councillors to discuss ways the annual fund can be used to improve future disaster responses. And Uganda's President Museveni has signed into law the controversial Anti-Homosexuality Bill 2023. Some sections of the law attract harsh punishments, including the death penalty. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, all routes still appear to be moving normally in the main centres. Our next news and weather are at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. Let's get to some of your feedback now, just very quickly on the subject of long working hours and being contactable on your mobile phone. John's got in touch. He says, I was a manager with 30 staff. I told the boss I didn't have a cell phone, so they supplied one. The boss was not impressed when I left it on my desk and the charger out of hours. I had to tell him he only rents me, says John. On the subject of vaping, lots of feedback on this one. My granddaughter started vaping at 11 after she started intermediate. She found it was easily available and she liked the flavours. It is an epidemic at her school. We have a huge problem. And one more, this one from a doctor who says nicotine is an addictive drug. Would we allow any other addictive drug to be readily available? Of course not. Vape products should be available only through pharmacies and only for smoking cessation, that doctor says. Do keep it coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. A tax expert believes vague rules around government COVID support payments have caught some small businesses out as Inland Revenue demands refunds. Last night, Checkpoint brought you the story of Aucklander Hugh Grierson, who owns a boutique beer company and has been ordered by Inland Revenue to pay back more than $46,000 in COVID support payments. Now, that's because he used some of the business support package to pay his own wages as the company's only worker. And Inland Revenue also disputes the dates he used to calculate his drop in revenue. It's told 513 people who received COVID payments to pay them back. That's $16.4 million. Deloitte New Zealand tax partner Robin Walker joins me now. Kia ora, Robin. How clear were all the rules for applying for this money, do you think?
Well, it's an interesting question, and even, these payments some of them were last year, and I must say it's all a bit foggy to me. It feels like many years ago. So I think definitely when you sort of put yourself back in the position of being in a COVID lockdown or some sort of restrictions of a type, a lot of businesses would have had a high level of anxiety and desperate to make sure that their businesses were able to get payments through because of the restrictions that were placed on them. So in some cases, it might be that people weren't paying close enough attention to what the actual detailed terms and conditions were of the payments. But I mean, what I would also say is that the guidance on the Inland Revenue website was fairly high level, and there was sort of a degree of pragmatism and options available to businesses to consider whether or not they were eligible.
So when you say the advice was reasonably high level, can you be a bit clearer? What do you mean?
Yeah, so one of the issues that we seem to be coming across is that self-employed people have used it to pay their own wages, or covering their own costs, because they're basically the biggest cost of the business. Now, what the Inland Revenue website says at a high level on sort of the general pages is that the COVID support payment or the resurgence support payment is to cover business expenses. And it doesn't go into any fuller details of exactly what that precisely means. Now, so that leaves you in a bit of a quandary. Now, when you have been applying for the COVID payments, you then had to go into the MyIR process and fill out a detailed declaration. And that had a number of questions in it. And so one of the questions or declarations that you had to make is that, the payment would only be for business expenses only, including wages, capital expenditure, core operating costs, and also declaring that the payments would not be passed through to any shareholders, owners, partners, trustees, members of the business, for example, by way of a dividend or a loan or any other payment. So Inland Revenue's view seems to be that any money that went to any owners of the business has breached that particular term. And so I think
that's interesting, Robin, isn't it? Because we talked about business expenses, and wages are a business expense. Is it not conceivable that a person applying for this would think to themselves, I'm not paying myself a dividend, I'm not paying myself a return on profit, I am paying myself simply a wage to put food on the table?
Yes, I would not be surprised that a lot of people thought that that's how it should apply, and would not have necessarily thought deeply about that second term about not passing any of the money through to shareholders, because it's, like you say, it wasn't a dividend.
Can there be any leniency if there's no malice involved in doing this, that you weren't sort of fraudulently trying to get the money? You've made a mistake in some cases.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what discretions apply to Inland Revenue, but they should have options available to them in terms of collecting that debt. So there should be an ability for taxpayers to enter into instalment arrangements to ensure that it can be paid off over an extended period of time so that the business can actually continue.
Because that is another interesting thing. I've seen the bills for one business in particular who it's accruing penalties already, and they're reasonably hefty, while they're trying to negotiate some kind of payment program. And the irony of that is that it could actually sink the business that the government was paying money to in order to keep it afloat. It's kind of counterintuitive to what the end goal was.
Yeah, so there were some concessions that were introduced with COVID-19 right back at the very beginning, which did allow people to defer making their tax payments into instalment arrangements. And so long as those were complied with, I think it's until April 2024, then there should have been the ability to have full remission of penalties and interest. So it might just be a question mark of, I think, how the rules were working is that those penalties and interest would still be applied. But so long as the debt or the instalment arrangement was cleared by April 2024, then those penalties and interest should be remitted at that particular point in time. But it might be a little bit stressful when you see them accruing on a real-time basis.
So, Robin, very quickly, because we're almost out of time, do you think it was confusing even for some people offering advice on this, like accountants and tax experts?
Oh, absolutely. And just in research for coming on your show today, I looked through my own files of what I'd saved back in the days of COVID, and I did find a Q&A session, a reasonably detailed document that went through a number of questions which I believe had been asked to Inland Revenue by accountants. And there's a number of examples in here which talk about self-employed people paying themselves. But I don't know where I got this document from. It is an Inland Revenue document, but I can't find it on their website anywhere. So it's one of those things where, you know, they might have answered some questions, but they're not readily available for people to find.
Thank you so much for your time, Robin. That's Robin Walker, who's Deloitte New Zealand, a tax partner on the issue of people being asked to pay back some COVID funding. Embattled retailers doubt more money for fog cannons will stop the spate of ram raids they're experiencing. The government's announced another $11 million for the fog cannon scheme, which the police minister says has been incredibly popular. But retailers say they need more police on the beat around their stores to stop the crime happening in the first place. Our reporter Jimmy Allingham and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
A fog cannon didn't prevent Northcote shop Mitchell's Paper Power getting ram-raided for a second time in April. So today, owner Jay Patel is having a second one installed.
Fog cannon, it's good, but to stop them doing it again and again, need to punish them. That's the problem. They're not doing it. So that's let them off, and they keep on doing it.
I mean, is there anything that would stop it? Do you ever think I'm going to stop doing business?
Oh, yeah. I have sort of, if it happened again, then will be the last one, I think.
In 20 years in business, Mr. Patel has never seen so much crime. Do you feel safe here?
No, not at all.
What would you like to see to make you feel safe?
Well, if they need to do something about the punishment. People who are doing this, if no punishment, that's why not going to happen. They're not going to stop them doing it. And it doesn't matter what you do, how secure you make your shop, it's still going to happen.
The government's announced a further $11 million for fog cannons, adding to the $4 million pledged last year. Since February, of the more than 1,600 approved, 584 have been installed, keeping contractors like Johnny Walker on their toes.
I've been doing these back to back. This is easily my 12th or more. So just liquor stores, bars, yeah.
And everywhere you've gone to, they've been hit?
Yeah, quite often that's how we know we've got the right address, is the plywood instead of the glass doors.
Mr Walker installed a cannon at one retailer hit 4 times.
The violence is escalating as well. I know some shopkeepers are just sold up and not doing retail at all anymore. They're just getting abused, and I was actually doing an install when a lady shopkeeper, dairy owner, was getting abused by a customer at the time. And yeah, myself and my colleague had to step out and just scare him off.
He's heard sad stories of shopkeepers too scared to go to work.
I think a lot of it's social media. The young kids are filming it. I think the first time this place was done, it was five school kids, and they caught them, and it was just for social media. They try to get the cigarettes, but they can't get into the case, so they take a few lollies.
Mr Walker, Mr Patel and owner of Takapuna jeweller, Fifth Avenue diamond experts Adrian Turner, all say something stronger than more fog cannons is needed. Mr Turner says his shop already has one cannon and he's waiting for a second one to be installed in the hope it deters would-be robbers.
Look, unfortunately, we've had a few instances. We had an after hours one, and then unfortunately we had one which was pretty sour, which was sort of during the afternoon, sort of 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So there was a couple of us in store, and the guys sort of attacked the windows, and they couldn't breach the windows, so they came in store, started smashing up the cabinet. So yeah.
Do you still feel safe operating?
No, I wouldn't say safe. No, you're always. You always have to be alert, and you're always watching what's going on now, cars, foot traffic. If someone's sitting on the wall outside the store, are they filming you? We've had situations where, we've been packing up at the end of the day, and people have been filming, watching what we're doing, and, where we put the stock and how we pack up.
Next door, a Michael Hill jeweller has closed for good after a series of burglaries and ram raids.
Feel for them. We got on well with them as a neighbour, but, the staff didn't want to return to work. There is a cost that comes with it, but the biggest thing is just, staff didn't want to return to work. People have got to feel safe, in the workplace, and it's a real shame. We're going to miss them.
Takapuna Beach Business Association Chief Executive Terence Harper says the extra funding is good, but fog cannons are an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
They seem to be getting more and more retail crime, but the crime's also more brazen. That people are breaking in the middle of the day, they're coming in smash and grabs, or they're using a vehicle to gain entry. We haven't seen that sort of thing in New Zealand for many years, so this is a new phenomenon that is coming, and it's really concerning.
Mr Harper says more police on the ground are needed urgently.
If you were listening to that report from Jimmy Allingham on radio, you can check out the video version filmed by Nick Monroe. It'll be on our webpage. Following decade-long professional rugby career in France, Mikaere Te Whata didn't join the media, open a sports store or head back to the family farm. Instead, a love of French cuisine inspired the loose forward to enrol at university to study the art of charcuterie. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robert Martin has more.
Just get a bit of freshly ground pepper.
Mikaere Te Whata went to France for a season, intending to harden up after knocking on the door of the Auckland side, but ended up staying on.
Mainly for Bayonne, so they were started in the second division, and then I had 6 years in the top 16 or top 14. So I guess it's the equivalent to the Super Rugby here in New Zealand. As you know, the French are just one above us on the world rankings, with Ireland up there as well.
At the end of 11 seasons of top-level European rugby, Te Whata turned his mind to a new career. No stranger to having a butcher's knife in hand, he first got stuck in at a mate's family get-togethers.
Each year the family would, if I could say, kill a pig, I guess, and they transform the pig. They use everything on it, so I guess having all those home recipes. And then I went to university over there, and the University Chambre de Métier de Bayonne, and that's where I learnt the métier, or the trade of charcuterie.
He was in love with the possibilities.
You've got the dried ham over there, so salted air dried hams, the saucisson, which is the salamis, you've got the patés, you've got the rillettes, which is either be duck, chicken or pork rillettes. And obviously, in France with the cuisine, they're the best of the best.
His wife Julie wasn't surprised when Makaira took up charcuterie.
We loved the food in France, and we were like, if we're coming home, what do we bring home that's different, and what can we give that the kids have grown up on? So they love this charcuterie side of it. So it was literally finish rugby. It meant we could spend a couple more years in France, actually, while Mike studied, so it gave us a perfect opportunity to stay there a little bit longer, and it also gave them something different to come back to, because no one else has got the same qualifications here.
Fast forward to 2014, and the pair headed home with their 3 daughters and set up Maison Aotearoa Charcuterie. Operating out of a converted 40-foot container on Julie's family farm in Ormata, they produce batches of pork, chicken and duck rillette and 3 varieties of pork pâté. Time to take the plunge with a duck rillette.
So this is the duck, and that is served at room temperature. The pâtés I recommend we serve chilled, and we'll just get a bit of freshly ground pepper. There we go, garnish that with a bit of fresh parsley, and then voila, try that, bon appetit. Is it something that you've tried before?
Not so much, but it's lovely. Yeah, it's nowhere near as heavy as a pâté. No, it's quite light, and I'm not sure what I would compare that to. It's nice. Makaira and Julie will be sharing their story as part of the Taranaki Taste and Trails Food Trail next month. And Maison Aotearoa Charcuterie will have a stall at the Auckland Food Show in July.
Let's get to some of your feedback, lots of it coming in on work hours. This person says working outside your paid hours is wage theft. Employers have got away with it for too long, stealing our downtime with endless emails and messages. We should take the French approach, where it's illegal to answer emails after work. If bosses try to make you go on strike. New Zealand workers are too timid, this person says. Flip side of the coin, another listener's got in touch. What on earth was that guy on about? No work messages, emails and calls when you're off work. Get real. During flooding after hours, 3 businesses I know had to ring every worker in to sandbag and save what they could. Imagine a worker saying, nah, I'm too tired. Thanks for your feedback. Keep it coming on that subject. On vaping, this one, a person says, I was a heavy smoker, 2 packs a day for over 20 years. Tried to stop on many occasions and I resigned myself to being a smoker for life. Decided to give vaping a go and haven't looked back since. Good on you. Tough thing to do. They say, I now feel no desire to smoke at all. Vapes should not be sold to non-smokers and there needs to be some balance, they reckon. Others of you reckon through pharmacies is the way to go rather than prescriptions, and many are asking, we need an age limit. Well, spoiler alert, there is an age limit. You shouldn't be able to buy vapes unless you're 18.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Talofa lava, I'm Evie Ashton. GPs say it's time to tighten up the rules on vaping. Following moves in Australia to ban recreational vaping, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has directed the Health Minister to bring some suggestions to Cabinet. Chair of General Practice New Zealand, Dr Brian Betty, has told Checkpoint that young people who otherwise would never have smoked are becoming addicted to nicotine in vapes. He says vaping has an important role to play in stopping smoking.
Vapes need to be pharmacy only, available through quitline programs or smoking cessation programs or through your GP or doctor. So we still need to make vapes available, however not freely available that you can walk off the street and grab whatever you want.
Dr Betty says nicotine affects young people's attention span, sleep and ability to learn. Wellington City Council inspectors last assessed safety systems at Loafers Lodge 5 years ago, even though they're meant to check every year. The last on-site audits at the lodge took place in 2018 and 6 years prior in 2012. 2 weeks ago, a fatal fire on the top floor of the Wellington building killed 5 people. Under government building regulations, councils are responsible for backup audits of commercial buildings. Boarding houses like Loafers Lodge are meant to be checked annually. The hostel was issued a building warrant of fitness by the council in March based on independent checks of its 13 safety systems. However, the council is meant to do its own backup audit on site every year. Waihi Beach residents are in clean-up mode after a flash flood inundated the north of the beachside settlement yesterday. Met Service says between 50 and 80 millimetres fell in the Waihi area in a 24-hour period. Daryl Hawkins says a nearby reservoir was already full and overflowed.
Of course, the water's just carried on down, and that's why down the bottom and why the surf club's so flooded. So it's a bit of a horror story because you've got a lot of affected people.
Dozens of people evacuated to the RSA and many spent the night at the nearby holiday park. The coroner's hearing into the 2015 disappearance of John Beckenridge and his stepson has heard that the police are confident the reports the pair had a satellite phone when they went missing were wrong. The coroner is ruling whether John Beckenridge and Mike Zhao Beckenridge are missing or dead. Detective Aaron Dempsey says he looked into reports from a friend of the 11-year-old that Mr Beckenridge had shown him what he had called a sat phone.
I am satisfied that John Beckenridge did not own or operate a satellite-capable phone, and the device witnessed by Anthony and Blake Rowley was highly likely to be an ear-to-ground radio that Mr Beckenridge had sold on Trade Me in 2014.
Aaron Dempsey says he also couldn't find any sign that Mr Beckenridge had a subscription with any satellite phone providers. Moscow's mayor says drones have hit several buildings in the Russian capital, causing minor damage but no serious injuries. Russia's RIA state news agency is reporting that some residents of a building in the city's south are being evacuated. Other agencies are quoting the regional governor saying several drones were destroyed on the approach to Moscow. Russia's Telegram messaging channels reported that 4 to 10 drones were shot down early on Tuesday, local time. Christchurch Airport has purchased another 40 hectares of farmland in the central Otago town of Taurus. The airport company hopes to build an international airport at the site after buying 750 hectares in 2020. However, the proposal has been met with strong opposition from locals. The airport has now bought the land off farmer Philip Parcell, who was approached in 2020 but didn't want to sell. Project Director Michael Singleton says the terms of the deal are confidential. Auckland's mayor wants communities to have more say on how the proposed $20 million storm response fund is spent. Wayne Brown has met councillors to discuss ways the annual fund can be used to improve future disaster responses. Jordan Dunn reports.
Wayne Brown says during the Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabriel, he was impressed by the hard work of local boards, volunteers and mana whenua. He says in Puhoi, local residents, led by the fire chief, cleaned up an entire town. Mr Brown says their can-do attitude gives him confidence that more decision-making can be done by communities. He says as part of funding a community response, containers with emergency supplies could be distributed to civil defence centres and marae across the region. The council was also considering installing cameras at flooding hotspots.
A committee of senior MPs will consider whether the Education Minister deliberately misled Parliament. Under questioning in the House in February, Jan Tinetti claimed she had no responsibility for the release of attendance data, but staff told her later that day that she was responsible. Ms Tinetti, however, didn't correct the record until earlier this month. Parliament's Speaker, Adrian Rudaffe, is referring the matter to Parliament's Privileges Committee, which will determine whether the minister's delay in correcting the inaccurate statement amounts to contempt. And a Wellington man had an unexpected surprise when he swam into the sea to investigate a floating object. It was spotted by his son, 12-year-old Guy Marshall, who had spent hours fishing at Eastbourne Beach on Sunday. His mother, Kendall Marshall, says her husband wanted to know what the moving item was, so he swam out to investigate.
My husband, he swam out about 50 metres offshore and realised it was a kiddo. So the kiddo was very happy to be cradled by my husband, Jay, and he was brought it back to shore. A lot of people at that point sort of dog walking and walking along the promenade, so they were all very interested to see my husband with this kiddo.
Moana, the kiddo, was taken back to the family's house before being picked up by bird protection group Kiddo Discovery and taken to Wellington Zoo. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Mihingarangi Forbes, host of Mata, RNZ's Māori political podcast, where commentators, newsmakers and politicians wānanga the big issues this election year.
Would you consider a coalition with the National Party?
Holy hikama, they'd have to pretty much have surgical transformation.
Nō reira, ariari taringa mai kia Mata, with Mihingarangi Forbes after the 6:30 headlines. Tonight on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula. Showers, some heavy. Thunderstorms possible in Taranaki this evening. Fog patches tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty and Taupo, clouded with a few showers today. Becoming fine tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with variable high cloud. Whanganui and from Taihape to Wellington, also for Waded Upper, occasional showers. Some heavy today, with thunderstorms possible from about Levin southwards this evening. Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine. Showers this evening, possibly heavy and thundery. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain or showers. Some heavy falls and thunderstorms today. For Canterbury, mainly fine. A few spots of rain this evening. Otago and Southland, high cloud. Scattered rain for a time today and again from tomorrow afternoon. And Chatham Islands, rain possibly heavy with thunderstorms, clearing tomorrow morning. The time is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. National has agreed to meet the government over the bipartisan housing policy it walked away from, but won't say when it will sit down with the minister. The opposition has gone back on its medium density residential standards agreement with Labour, saying it had its own better plan. Housing Minister Megan Woods has now written to the National Party twice in an attempt to save the deal. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
It was back in October 2021 when Megan Woods and National's then housing spokesperson Nicola Willis shared a podium in the Beehive Theatrette. A rare show of bipartisanship, both major parties giving their stamp of approval for urban housing intensification.
It makes sense to work together where there is a consensus.
Labour and National are standing together to say an emphatic yes to housing in our backyards.
That emphatic yes now out the window. National abandoning the medium density residential standards, or MDRS, in favour of its own plan to develop urban and greenfield spaces. The standards meant up to 3 homes of up to 3 storeys could be built on most sites without the need for resource consent. National's housing spokesperson Chris Bishop says his party's new policy is better, accounting for the flexibility communities and councils want in implementing density.
The point is to smash the urban limits that have held our cities back.
Former National Housing spokesperson, now Deputy Leader Nicola Willis, denies it's a U-turn.
I don't see it that way. I think it's a step forward and it will mean that we can get more houses built in our major areas while also providing flexibility for communities.
The Housing Minister Megan Woods wrote to National at the weekend saying Labour was willing to come back to the table on this policy. She's now written again, inviting Chris Luxon, Nicola Willis and Chris Bishop to meet with her.
The medium density residential standards only really worked when there was that certainty, when there was that bipartisanship, and I am keen to see if we can get back to having an agreed position and we don't make this a political football.
National's leader Christopher Luxon already chalking it up as a win for the opposition.
Isn't it great? I mean, basically, she's conceding, as Chris Hipkins is as well, that it's not working, and we would love to sit down with them and actually do a bipartisan deal on our policy. We think it's a better policy.
Green Party co-leader James Shaw says National's new policy is familiar.
When that first went through, we put a number of amendments up, including mixed use, and the Nats and Labour voted that down. So we are left feeling a little bit like if they'd just listened to us in the first place, you wouldn't be in half the mess you're in at the moment.
And with his climate change minister hat on, Mr Shaw says there's no business or climate case for the plan.
Urban sprawl is a more expensive, less efficient and more polluting way of creating our cities. It doesn't work. We've got decades of experience in it not working. I think the idea that you would now punt for that failed model is daft.
Housing Minister Megan Woods backs this up, saying a cost-benefit analysis for work done on the MDRS found the gross infrastructure cost per dwelling is roughly $38,000 for urban intensification and $64,000 for greenfields. She awaits National's response to her request they come back to the discussion table.
Annika Smith reporting there. It is almost 12 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some more of your thoughts on vaping and whether we need to tighten up with regulation. This person says banning vaping is not the solution. The problem is the nicotine. Vaping is a useful modality. The issue is big tobacco targeting kids and high nicotine lolly vapes and government's enablement of their child market capture. It is the nicotine, this person says. Another reckons that disposable vapes, should be banned for environmental reasons alone. This woman says, my daughter started high school in 2019. She remembers hearing classmates talking about their parents buying vapes. Don't just blame the government. Those of us called adults have to share some of the blame. If big tobacco is involved in anything, you can guarantee it's not for the health and well-being of consumers. And this one too. So when is alcohol going to be made available on prescription only? Interesting thought. Let's go to the Ukraine now, where buildings in Kiev are on fire as Russian missile strikes target the city for the third night running. At least one person has been killed in the latest attack, and the capital's residents are bracing for the night ahead. CNN's Fred Pleitgen has more.
Terrified children running for their lives as Russia unleashed another massive aerial attack on Ukrainian cities. But Ukraine says its air defense managed to shoot down all the ballistic missiles fired at the capital, Kiev. And now Ukraine's forces seem nearly ready for their own much-anticipated counter-offensive. This weekend, Ukraine's top general, Valery Zaluzhny, releasing this video showing troops gearing up for battle and showcasing modern Western weapons with a clear message: it's time to take back what's ours. And that's what these guys are training for. This is a unit of the Offensive Guard from Ukraine's Interior Ministry. We have a clear motivation, the commander says. We defend our lands. This is our nation, our homeland. The Offensive Guard is mustering tens of thousands of troops, they say, training to storm trenches and evacuate casualties, which they know they're bound to have in the tough battles ahead. What these guys are practicing here, no doubt, will become a reality for the Ukrainian armed forces very soon, as Kiev says it will start a massive counteroffensive to take back all of their territory, including Crimea. The Ukrainians already seem to be stepping up strikes on possible Russian supply lines in occupied areas. Russian-installed officials claiming Ukrainian missile attacks against targets around Berdyansk and Mariupol in southeastern Ukraine in the past days. It's just the beginning, a top advisor to Ukraine's presidency tells me. Everything that is happening now is a precursor for a counterattack, a necessary precursor where the intensity of fire increases. And he lays out bold aims for the counteroffensive. It will end undoubtedly on the borders of Ukraine as they were in 1991, with the deoccupation of Crimea and with the beginning of a massive process of transformation of Russia's political system. But for now, resilience remains key for the people in Ukraine's cities. These newlyweds had just tied the knot and were on their way to their celebration when the air raid sirens went off. So they just continued to celebrate in the bomb shelter, vowing not to let Russian rockets ruin the best day of their lives.
Uganda has just passed one of the harshest sets of anti-gay laws in the world. From today, anyone convicted of practising homosexual acts faces life imprisonment or even death. Phil Vine from the World Watch team reports.
The reaction from the LGBTQ+ community in Uganda is one of fearful dismay.
How did we become refugees in our own countries?
The new law imposes life imprisonment as a punishment for having gay sex and the death sentence for what it calls aggravated homosexuality. Activist Delovi Kwagala says gay people are no longer safe.
You are arresting us for literally doing nothing, for simply existing, but where are we supposed to go?
The BBC's Africa editor, Will Ross, says the first version of the new legislation even had provisions to punish those who failed to report gay activity.
The initial
bill that was sent back to President Yoweri Museveni was changed because, if, for example, you were a landlord and you knew that your tenant was gay, you would by law have to report them, or you yourself could face a punishment. So it's not illegal to be gay, but it's the sexual acts that are still the problem according to the law.
The revised anti-gay law was passed by a majority of MPs. Will Ross describes Uganda as a very conservative society.
I think it would be fair to say that if somebody wanted to stand as an MP and their main platform was "I am pro-gay rights," they wouldn't have a chance.
Indeed, there are many on the street in Uganda who support aspects of the legislation.
Generally, the feeling amongst Ugandans is that homosexuality and all the related behaviours are generally foreign and should not be tolerated.
Obed Nomanya is in favour of the 20-year punishment for promoting homosexual activity, but not capital punishment.
I agree with the part that prohibits promotion of homosexuality, but the part where it involves punishing, capital punishment to the people caught practicing homosexuality, I would say that is to the extreme.
The harsh law has been partly a result of intensive religious lobbying, particularly from the Pentecostal church.
And some of the heat around this whole debate and funding has come from the United States, where far-right conservatives and Pentecostal churches have focused on this issue and have actively promoted trying to get harsher laws in place.
Activists in Uganda have already filed a petition to challenge the law on constitutional grounds.
This bill has okayed violence against LGBTQ plus Ugandans. It has okayed discrimination. It has okayed crude violations of human rights against LGBTQ plus Ugandans.
The United Nations warns Uganda's progress on HIV and AIDS is now in jeopardy.
This law will put barriers up for people to access life-saving health services. This law will cost lives.
There's already been a strong Western reaction. The UK and EU have condemned the anti-gay law, while President Joe Biden is threatening to impose sanctions on Uganda.
And while we've been talking about vape regulations in New Zealand, the UK is taking steps to reduce vaping among young people by closing a loophole which allows stores to offer free samples to children. A ban on nicotine-free vapes for under 18s is also being considered. The BBC's Hugh Pym reports.
A recent laboratory test for BBC News on illegal vapes confiscated at a school showed some had more than twice the safe amount of lead and 9 times the safe amount of nickel. The Prime Minister said he was shocked by this report and said he was taking further action to clamp down on rogue firms who unlawfully target children with these products. The measures include closing a loophole allowing retailers to give free samples of vapes with nicotine to children in England, even though it's against the law to sell them to under 18s. There's to be a review of a possible ban on retailers selling nicotine-free vapes to teenagers, and possible new powers for trading standards officers to impose on-the-spot fines more easily. The campaign group Action on Smoking and Health welcomed the announcement but said the government could do more.
There are a number of things that the government can do to reduce the attractiveness of vapes. The most attractive vapes to children are the cheap disposables, which can be bought for under a £5. Months ago, at the time of the budget, we called on the government to tax these vapes. They're bad for the environment and bad for children. A £5 on each disposable vape would have made them much less attractive to children.
Health experts recommend vaping to adult smokers to help them quit their tobacco habit. But the challenge now is to stop teenagers taking up vaping and sometimes using unlicensed products with safety risks.
One of the things that I'm really concerned about is with the current legislation, there really is no deterrent for the handful of rogue traders that are selling these products to children. That's why we want to see, these large fines brought into place.
Ministers have already announced a £3 million fund to help tackle illegal retailing and has called for evidence on further ideas to limit the supply of vapes to children.
South Australia's state government is facing backlash over its moves to strengthen anti-protest laws. The proposed laws are in response to a protest staged 2 weeks ago by environmental campaigners, Extinction Rebellion. The protest blocked traffic on one of Adelaide's main roads during rush hour. The bill would see demonstrators who disrupt traffic jailed for 3 months and fined $50,000. Unions, environment and human rights groups say the laws are anti-democratic and they're urging the state government to rethink. The ABC's Angus Randall reports.
It's wet and cold outside South Australia's Parliament House, but hundreds of demonstrators are braving the weather to fight for what they say is their right to protest. They're angry at proposed state laws that could see protesters fined $50,000 for activities such as blocking traffic while demonstrating.
This is just a knee-jerk reaction and just a massive overreach. So we're all here today to protest that while we still can.
I've never protested before, but this is way too important not to. I've been a Labor voter all my life and I almost feel personally offended that the Labor movement, the Labor Party, would rush something like this through.
2 weeks ago, an Extinction Rebellion protester suspended herself below a major Adelaide bridge at peak hour. The road was blocked for over an hour. The next day, the state's Labor government passed amended laws through the lower house that would see disruptive protesters face a $50,000 fine and 3 months in jail. That's a jump from the previous punishment of $750. Later today, the bill is expected to pass the upper house. Protesters are worried the risk of heavy penalties could deter future action.
I'm concerned it will, and I don't like that thought. Because it's scary. But I think there's all sorts of examples where it's the right thing to do.
Would it affect your decision to protest if you might find yourself out $50,000?
Look, absolutely not. Can I afford it? No. But is there something more, even more expensive at stake? Yes.
Well, I think it's going to change everyone's mind, whether they're going to go to a rally or a protest or not. And that's a bad thing.
The proposal has angered groups from across the political spectrum. More than 80 civil society groups have signed an open letter to Parliament against the bill. Ross Womersley is the CEO of the South Australian Council of Social Service.
Yeah, it's an unusual and fantastic collection of people, and I guess that it demonstrates that civil society in Australia today, civil society in South Australia, is still really concerned about our rights to be able to speak out when we need to speak out about the issues that count.
The proposal has support from both Labor and the Liberals, so it should easily pass the upper house. SA Best upper house member Connie Benaros is walking among the protesters wearing a T-shirt saying, "Arrest me, Pete." She'll be heading into Parliament later today. For now, she's calling on Premier Peter Malinauskas to reconsider.
You shouldn't be treating the public like mugs. This here is what democracy looks like, and Mally better take a good hard look at what he's done today, because this is his rank and file out here today that are saying what you're doing is just not on.
The Greens are hoping to take it to a parliamentary committee for further review, but that would require a shift from one of the major parties. Premier Peter Malinauskas says South Australia will always protect the right to protest, but his proposal will deter unreasonable disruption.
We're open-minded to potentially looking at a few of the amendments in the upper house process, just as long as it preserves the government realising our objectives, because there is a problem that needs to be fixed here, in our view, and I think in the minds of a significant number of South Australians. We've made it clear from the outset what our objective is, and we're determined to achieve it.
South Australia's Parliament sits this afternoon.
Thailand is about to be led by its youngest Prime Minister in nearly 80 years. At 42 years old, Peter Limjaroenrat is bucking the trend, with the average age of cabinet ministers in Thailand at about 65. What's more, his political career began when he was a student in New Zealand. In an interview, the incoming Thai Prime Minister said while doing his homework in a small Waikato town in the 90s, he'd listened to broadcasts of speeches by then Prime Minister Jim Bolger. His Move Forward party is now looking to limit the powers of the army and the monarchy in Thailand. The BBC's Jonathan Head reports.
Almost no one predicted this. The most radical party contesting the Thai election coming out ahead of all of its rivals. Move Forward's 42-year-old leader, Peter Limjaroenrat, is now poised to become the youngest Prime Minister in living memory, elected on his promise to make Thailand a fairer and more competitive country. But he faces formidable obstacles.
Whether or not there ever is a reformist administration here in Thailand, whether the yearning for change expressed by millions of voters is ever reflected in their government, depends largely on 250 mainly male, mainly elderly senators, all appointed here in Parliament. And most of them are resolutely opposed to Move Forward's wish to reform both the military and the monarchy.
People have come here to voice their anger against the injustice of an unelected body being given the power to block what they voted for. Yet this senator was unmoved. Criticise anyone you want, he said. Your uncles, your aunts, I don't care. But I won't accept you touching the monarchy.
It could block you forming a government.
So I asked Peter Limcharoenrat why he didn't put the sensitive issue of the monarchy aside for now, in particular his pledge to amend the punitive lèse-majesté law.
Because it's what we had promised the people. And we have enough mandate, we have the votes of 14 million people, and they understood. It was clear, it was transparent that it's one of the things, one of the agendas that we wanted to push.
Move Forward is now in talks with its coalition partners. Thailand allows months for a new government to be formed. And this young party must also hope that it can avoid the fate that has befallen so many elected governments in Thailand, being deposed by a coup or court verdict.
There's a lot of various countries all around the world that had to go through the same kind of experience here in Thailand, unaccountable, invisible hands of power throwing out away elected officials. So if I look at the international experiences of how they came out of, how they broke the cycle, came out of military coup, South Korea, Indonesia, some of our friends in Latin America. So I look at them and I see that, yeah, the politics of possibility, it's possible for you to break out of the cycle.
The surge of support for Move Forward in this election revealed a hunger for new leaders and new ideas among people of all ages. Ignoring their wishes could bring renewed turmoil to Thailand.
Okay, some of your final thoughts on vaping regulations. This listener says, I'm almost 65, started smoking around 12. Most dads smoked then, so I just took smokes from the pile of packets stacked on the dressing table. Finally have stopped smoking. Have a vape, only use it a few times a night. It's very helpful, but I'd rather see vapes only available from your doctor. I've seen a young girl buy a fancy pink one. Oh dear, they say. Vape shops everywhere. Stop them now, says Anne-Marie. On the subject of working too much, who would answer a customer call at 8 a.m. on a Sunday? Where is my weekend? In the old days, they wrote a letter. The response time was 1 week. And Murray says the Apple phones have a do not disturb feature. Hang on a minute, I'm just going to have a look for that one, Murray. It says no noise and notifications between certain hours. Easy to dial it up, says Murray. But for the guilt. Okay, the Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. If you missed anything on the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, Wairoa Mayor Craig Little tells First Up about the petition he's launched to bring a vulnerable resident displaced since Cyclone Gabrielle home to Wairoa. Do tune in for that one, 5 a.m.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Talofa lava, good evening. I'm Evie Ashton. A GP group believes making vapes prescription only goes too far, but says a halfway option could be found. Parents who use a surrogate will no longer have to adopt their child under reforms to the surrogacy law. The police minister says it's too early to tell whether the police union is right when it says changes to the police pursuit policy will cause more deaths. And Russia's RIA state news agency is reporting that residents of a building in Moscow's south are being evacuated after drone attacks. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan, children's musician Waihi Beach, who wows audiences with new musical inventions, playing instruments he makes from heaters, airbed pumps, tyre valves and anything he can find. He joins us for Bookmarks, plus our rescheduled